guys. Welcome to Convicted Hearts, where we always keep our heart convicted. Today, I'm going to talk to you a bit about how I grew up and why I've been holding back on talking to you about childhood. I do have a lot of trouble with some memories, but obviously, I don't have trouble with certain memories. And this is one of them. In 2005, a week from today that I'm filming this, one of the worst tragedies in my family happened. And that was the day that my brother shot our stepfather. Our stepfather was, at the time, a SA crimes detective, and this took place in our family home. I was already married and moved out, had children, 3 children at the time. And this was something that rocked our family completely, as I'm sure you can imagine. It was unexpected. I will say right now, my stepfather has never spoke to me about it or told the story as far as any details, and my brother never made a statement or told the story with any details. So that's something else I guess I was left with, and my children are left with, and different family members trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense, right? Our stepfather came into our lives when we were about 12 years old, and there was nothing, to speak of as far as any hard feelings or anything like that. I think it was a typical, blending of families. He was always good to us. He was a provider, took care of us, never was abusive or anything like that. This was just something that just absolutely did not make sense. And coming up on the anniversary of this terrible incident, September 4th, a lot of memories are coming back. I had had a lot of trouble before remembering certain things because it was so painful. That might not make sense to some people, but dealing with this through therapy at certain times, I have learned that I am somebody who happens to not deal with my traumas as a form of survival. Disassociate, I guess is what it's called. So that's what I do. And not intentional, just basically as a survival mechanism. I've talked about this on other channels, maybe, and not maybe, I have talked about this in other channels and interviews, but I realized I've never really spoke about it on my own channel. And I've got some new subscribers, so I thought, why not kind of touch on things and let people know where I'm coming from. Sometime in the early morning on this day, I came to know about it because our real dad, our bio dad, who was still in our lives but lived a little ways away, called me. A little ways, I mean like 20, 30 minutes. I mean not in the immediate area. He called me early in the morning, and I was already up getting ready for church, and it was very weird for my dad to call me at that time. He didn't get up that early. My dad, our dad, at the time was actually a correctional officer at Soledad Prison. That's a whole other story I'll get into eventually, if you stick with me. So when my dad called me, the first thing he said was, "Have you talked to your brother?" Instantly, everything in my mind went wrong. I knew something was wrong. My thoughts started racing. Obviously said, "Why? What's wrong?" He said, "Your aunt got a phone call, and one of their neighbors was listening to a police scanner, and it said that blah, blah shot his father." Assuming that it was our bio dad, I guess my aunt obviously flipped out and called our bio dad. So once my dad called me and gave me that info, I was in complete panic, hysteria, and I was, excuse me, fortunate enough that I had a young lady living with me who was like a foster daughter at the time. And she stayed with the kids while I sped over to my mom and stepfather's home. I had no idea what I was about to walk into. I just thought I was going to drive up to the house, right? Wrong. I got to like the bottom of the driveway and saw, I can't even tell you how many sheriff's cars, like a SWAT van, um, media. It was complete chaos. And I was stopped at the bottom of the hill. I couldn't even get to the driveway. And they asked who I was, and I obviously said my full name. And I remember the cop saying, "Oh, you're the stepchild. Then you're one of them." You know, basically like, "Oh, you're one of the guilty party," or basically just categorizing me with whatever my brother had allegedly just done. That felt so awful, you know, to hear. As much as this was not part of me or my life or anything to do with who I am as a person, it's, I don't know, maybe other people out there that have a family member who has been charged with a crime they're considered guilty of can relate to this. But you feel like you're guilty by association almost. Like nobody is going to want me around or want me to be involved in anything because I am blood related to the person responsible for this. I was concerned for my grandparents. They lived on the same street, but I was not allowed to go to them. And I wasn't allowed to go to my mother, who I was really concerned for as well, because imagine, I didn't know if my stepfather was even alive at this point. He did survive, by the way, thank God. But by the time they finally let me through, I walked up the hill and I saw my mother standing there. I won't go into too much detail because, this still is a very personal story in a way, even though it was public in a way. Like, strangely enough, my family never has truly sat down and talked to each other about this. I know that probably sounds really odd, but when really messed up things happen within your family, a lot of times they're not discussed fully. And you might not have something like this in your family, but you may have other things that truly haven't been discussed. So, like, try to relate and follow what I'm saying. Got up to my mother. She was completely distraught. She looked like she was there, but the lights weren't on. They wouldn't allow her to go immediately to be with my stepfather, who had already been life flighted to a trauma center in the Bay Area. They were trying to figure out what happened, who was involved, what went down. We were all trying to figure out what happened. I didn't know if my brother had even been caught yet. And then I remember asking one of the officers, "Did you shoot my brother?" Because that was my first thought, is surely they killed him if he shot a cop. And they said no. They caught him and detained him. So I was somewhat yeah, I don't want to say somewhat. I was relieved, but also still horrified because I was trying to brace myself for what was to come. I asked, "Is my stepfather alive?" They said yes, he was alive when they loaded him in the helicopter. which I knew he hated the thought of flying. So my heart went out to him right away. I'm sorry. I don't know that I've ever sat here alone and talked about it. It's a lot more difficult than when you talk to someone else. I don't know. I guess because you're alone with your thoughts and your memories. I couldn't make it all better. And that was normally my place in the family. I felt anyways. I couldn't really comfort my mom because she was so distraught. And I didn't think or feel like my step siblings wanted anything to do with me. I had to call my dad too, our bio dad, right? So I called him and I said, Dad, and I could hear in his voice. My dad was never rattled, you guys, ever. He was in the military during Vietnam. He was a correctional officer. This is the guy that got fired from an AM, PM, or 7-Eleven for beating the crap out of a robber. So that was my dad. I had to call him and tell him it's true. This really happened. The sound in his voice was so distraught that it actually made me physically ill. And I got sick to my stomach, I'd never heard my dad upset like that. The panic, And he was the one that was always cool and collected. So this shocked me. Everything was a shock. I thought surely my stepfather wouldn't survive that. And I kind of relayed that to my dad, and he said something like, "Oh no." And then I said, "Well, I don't know, Dad. I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure." In the end, I don't want to say the thing that saved my stepfather. The thing that saved my stepfather, in my opinion, is God and our family's faith in God. But also the fact that he was shot with a low caliber firearm that happened to be very old. I won't go into specific areas because that's his body, his business. But he was in bad shape. And he was not conscious for some time. Several surgeries. Our family was torn apart. I was able to see my stepfather that first day, and it was frightening. Again, out of respect for him, I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but it was scary to look at. I went home after that. I was terrified for my mom, for my stepfather, and then my mind went to my father, and then my brother, because yeah, he did something awful that he couldn't take back. But I still felt a sense of responsibility to him because I was his only sibling. So I just sort of went into survival mode and called a local attorney that I had seen on the news. And ironically enough, I remember my stepfather telling me about this particular attorney. And if you ever got into any criminal troubles, this is the guy you want. Well, that's who I called. I met up with him. He went over his prices, and it was mind-blowing. Obviously, I didn't have anything like that. I had 3 small children, had recently become disabled. Um, but and I didn't know our bio dad's finances. I never talked to him or asked him about his position in life, and he lived very simple, like more than simple. Some people might say cheap. Like he rinsed off his paper plates, rinsed out his Ziploc bags, extremely frugal. Okay. So I had no idea if he would be able to pull this off. But I went to him and told him about this attorney. He went in with me to a meeting. We sat down, spoke with the attorney, and when he brought up what he needed money wise, my dad was like, no, I can't do that. And I obviously fell apart. For some reason, I mean, I didn't know anything about the law like that. I just thought immediately, like, my brother shot a cop. They're going to definitely give him the death penalty in my mind. That's what I'm thinking, right? When my dad saw how upset I got, I think I feel guilty still. After I tell a few more story times, you'll probably know why. I feel like my dad saw my reaction and changed his mind and said, yes, I can do that. And he paid for this attorney. I took a couple checks in for him myself, and believe me, it could have been a decent down payment on a house in California. Long story short, my stepfather survived. He did not, believe it or not, have hatred in his heart for my brother. He was actually concerned for him when he awoke from his coma. Yeah. That was something a judge noted, but made mention of, I can't really consider that in sentencing because I would have to consider it in sentencing everyone hereafter that has a similar case. So my brother got his first term in prison. My almost twin, 14 months apart to the day, had been with each other through everything in childhood and being a teenager. I'd had 3 kids by the time this happened. Our grandparents were still here. Our grandfather was just getting ill with dementia and Alzheimer's during this time. In fact, the SWAT team kicked open my grandmother's door in her bedroom door, looking for my brother that morning, and startled her so bad, even though she couldn't really hear. She's needed her. She did need her hearing aids for a long time. Obviously, waking up to that is traumatic. And then my grandfather not being in his right state of mind because of dementia and Alzheimer's, she kind of screamed out at them, "What are you doing?" They said something like, "We're looking for your grandson," said his name. And being the grandma she always has been, she said, "You better not hurt my grandson." And she meant it. And this is a woman that's like literally woke up in bed with weapons pointed at her. Sorry, that's my dog scratching on the door. Long story short, stepfather survives. Brother does his first prison term. This was very difficult. I really did a lot of self-destructive behavior towards myself, on myself during that time. I felt like half of me was ripped away. I felt like I should have known, should have seen a sign, could have done something. You feel like that guilt, like you could have changed something, But then I still thought, well, my brother's young enough that he can still get out and make a life for himself. we can still make it. We can still be a family. It's not ever going to be the same, but we can still do it. And some of the yards, I won't go into too much detail. I know a lot of people love to, what yard were you on? What? And I get it. I like to hear that stuff sometimes too. But when it's your loved one, yes, he was on some of the more serious prison yards during that first term, and some really bad things happened. He came out okay. I mean, physically. So I don't know. I guess that's where I'm going to leave this one. I think I'm going to have to do several parts. I'm sorry if I seem a little distant or out of it, but it is very odd to sit here and look at a computer screen and tell my feelings about something that happened that completely altered the entire path of my life, my children's life, my parents' life, my grandparents' life. Nothing was ever the same. Nothing ever became the same again. And the hopes of things getting better and at least tolerable, well, that idea teased our family for some time before the unimaginable happened. And that is what I will talk about in my next story time with you guys. Hope I didn't bore you too much. I just think it's important that we talk about real life stuff. I don't know. This is my real life, so I'm not sure if other people will think this is crazy or odd, or this is a wild story, or if like, that stuff happens all the time. But you know what? I'm telling you from my perspective. I'm not speaking for my brother, my mom, my stepfather, my dad, my grandparents. This is what I went through. This is what trauma can do to your family. This is what substances can do to your family. This is what not communicating and thinking it's going to be fine, just ignore it. It's going to be fine. It's going to go away. It's going to get better. Can do to your family. When you don't know better, you don't do better. When you know better, you do better. So I guess that's the lesson for the day. So until next story time, you guys can let me know if, I don't know, you want to hear more. If not, I understand. But with that said, much love and blessings from myself to all of you. I sincerely and genuinely appreciate each and every one of you and allowing me to share my life with you. So until next time, much love.